In the world of business mythology, few names sound as fearless as Richard Branson. He was a dyslexic school dropout who built a global empire, crossed oceans in hot air balloons, and challenged some of the largest corporations on Earth. His brand stood for rebellion, youth, and bold moves. The Virgin name promised that outsiders could win. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Not every Virgin venture flew. Some crashed hard. Two of the most painful examples were Virgin Cola and Virgin Cars. They were ambitious, they were loud, they were deeply symbolic, and they lost tens of millions of dollars, created serious debt pressure inside the Virgin Group, and forced Branson to rethink the limits of his famous challenger strategy. This is not the story of a billionaire success. This is the story of how even the boldest entrepreneur can misjudge power, timing, and economics, and how failure at scale really looks when you go to war with giants. By the mid-1990s, Richard Branson was at his peak. Virgin Atlantic was profitable. Virgin Records had produced global stars. The Virgin brand was worth billions in recognition alone. Branson believed something radical. He believed brand power could beat structural dominance. Virgin Cola was launched in 1994. The goal was simple and audacious. Take on Coca-Cola and Pepsi, the two most powerful consumer brands in history. Branson did not hide this ambition. He drove a tank through Times Square, literally crushing Coca-Cola cans in a public stunt designed to show defiance. At the same time, Virgin Cars entered the UK market. The idea was to disrupt car retail by offering fixed prices, transparency, and a customer-friendly experience. No haggling, no pressure, just trust and brand confidence. On paper, both ideas felt logical. Cola was a massive market. Cars were expensive and disliked purchases. Consumers loved Virgin. Branson believed he could import Virgin's airline-style disruption into everyday products. But here is where optimism quietly replaced economics. Virgin Cola expanded rapidly. It launched in the UK, then pushed into the United States and parts of Europe. In the UK, Virgin Cola reached an estimated 10% market share at its peak. That sounds impressive until you realize the cost. To gain shelf space, Virgin had to pay retailers heavily. Coca-Cola and Pepsi controlled distribution through long-term contracts, exclusive fridge agreements, and volume incentives. Virgin was fighting not just brands but the distribution infrastructure. Virgin Cars opened multiple locations across the UK. At its peak, it sold tens of thousands of vehicles annually. The customer experience was praised. Pricing was clear. Staff were trained to be friendly rather than aggressive, but the margins were razor-thin. Car retail already operated on small profits. Virgin added higher service costs without control over manufacturing or supply pricing. Volume alone could not fix the math. For a brief moment, it looked like Virgin might pull it off. The media loved the story. Consumers were curious. The Virgin logo once again symbolized rebellion. Then reality arrived. Please subscribe to our channel. We want to hit 5,000 subscribers. Now you might be thinking, how can a strong brand fail so badly? The answer lies in power imbalance. Virgin Cola faced retaliatory pressure. Retailers who stocked Virgin products reported subtle threats from Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Better terms elsewhere would disappear. Marketing support would vanish. Shelf space would shrink. Branson later admitted that this pressure was real and intense. Virgin simply did not have the capital reserves to sustain a long distribution war. Every bottle sold often lost money after marketing and placement costs. Virgin Cars suffered from a different problem: inventory financing. To sell cars, Virgin had to finance large volumes of stock. That required debt. As car prices fluctuated and manufacturers tightened margins, Virgin Cars found itself holding depreciating assets funded by borrowed money. By the late 1990s, Virgin Cars was reportedly carrying debts estimated between £50 million and £60 million. Sales slowed. Overheads remained. The math stopped working. Inside the Virgin Group, cash flow stress was building. Virgin Cars collapsed first. In 2002, Virgin Cars entered administration in the UK. Over 2,000 jobs were lost. Branson later admitted it was one of his most painful failures. The company could not service its debts. Inventory financing costs crushed the business. Virgin Group absorbed losses estimated at more than £100 million when you include guarantees and write-downs. Virgin Cola followed a slower decline. Unable to secure sustainable shelf space in the United States and squeezed in the UK, Virgin Cola gradually retreated. By the early 2000s, it had effectively disappeared from most major markets. Industry analysts estimate Virgin lost between £25 million and £30 million on the cola venture. Contrary to popular myth, Virgin Cola itself did not file for bankruptcy in a dramatic court case. Instead, it quietly shut down operations, sold off remaining rights in some regions, and accepted the loss. But the damage was real. Combined, Virgin Cola and Virgin Cars contributed to hundreds of millions in cumulative losses and liabilities across the wider Virgin Group ecosystem. These failures increased reliance on profitable units like Virgin Atlantic and Telecom Ventures to subsidize mistakes. Branson survived, but the myth cracked. After these failures, something changed in Richard Branson's strategy. He became more cautious about capital-intensive retail businesses. Future Virgin Ventures relied more on partnerships and licensing, and on asset-light models. Risk was shared. Capital exposure was limited. Virgin no longer tried to outmuscle giants purely with branding. It chose niches where incumbents were weak or unpopular, such as mobile telecom and later space tourism branding rather than mass manufacturing. Branson openly discussed these failures in interviews. He acknowledged that passion sometimes overrode discipline, that challenging monopolies sounded romantic, but monopolies exist for structural reasons. Virgin Cola taught him that distribution power matters more than brand charisma. Virgin Cars taught him that thin margins plus debt equals fragility. So, what is the real lesson of Virgin Cola and Virgin Cars? It is not that Richard Branson failed. It is that even legends bleed when they ignore economic gravity. Branson once said that business is about having fun and making a difference. But these ventures proved that fun does not pay debts and difference does not protect against cash flow collapse. Virgin Cola tried to fight a war of endurance without the ammunition. Virgin Cars tried to change an industry without controlling its cost structure. Both relied on hope that consumers would overpower systems built over decades. They did not. Yet, in a strange way, these failures strengthened the Virgin story. They revealed honesty. They showed that experimentation includes loss. They forced evolution. Richard Branson did not go bankrupt personally. Virgin Group did not collapse. But these ventures left scars measured in tens of millions of pounds, lost jobs and humbled assumptions. And that is the true business documentary ending. Not every challenger wins. Not every bold idea deserves survival. And sometimes, the most valuable outcome of failure is knowing where not to fight again. Because in business, courage opens the door. But economics decides who stays inside. And even Richard Branson had to learn that the hard way.